From the day I set foot on your shores, I fed you shit. I fed you shit.
最後に触れるのはアンジン様の手にいたしましょう。
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are discussing Shogun Episode 10, the Season 1 finale and possibly the series finale. This incredible saga began by painting a picture for us, a cunning man 2 steps ahead. 6 episodes have come and gone, and we learned his legend, Yoshi Toranaga. Renown preceded him, striking terror in his enemies, and the show duly highlighted the paranoia that comes with facing such a foe. Everything needed to be considered. The next 3 episodes were about breaking that renown and painting a new picture. The broken man, at the end of his life, admitting that his feet could only carry him a little further. The final episode was preceded with this dramatic swing, making us consider everything humanly possible that a cunning man could do with a limp. And in the end, his cunning was crafted by loyalty, and his story will forever reign due to a single woman living and dying for her lord. Truly, if any moral truth can be taken away from this series, it's why we should always strive for things that are bigger than ourselves. We should fight wars that are larger than the ones that we wage in our own minds, and maybe most of all, we should convince our friends to kill themselves so that we can get ahead in life. That's right, you thought I was being sweet, you thought I was being thought-provoking. Think again. Toranaga's a motherfucking warlord, a fucking Shogun. He quite literally convinced all of his prize vassals into a noiseless smothering, and for what? To unite a Japan that they will never see, and they did it gladly. They drank the Kool-Aid like it was their mother's teat. They loved their lord, they loved their country, and truthfully, that type of nationalism has just never quite sat right with America since Pearl Harbor or any NASCAR event. This series was a shocking look at how humanity used to exist, and the romance of that life and death is not lost on me. It is a beautiful, idealized version of humanity, one that shows us the benefits of considering the small part you could play in the grander story instead of believing that you're the main character and expecting others to contribute to your rise. But they made us fall in love with Mariko so that she could be used as propaganda for a leader that hardly cares for the death of his own son. And God, I love it. Oh my God. Never have I actively so rooted for someone that is by today's standard a morally bankrupt individual. He even told us that this isn't a game of friends and enemies. If this wasn't set in a culture that we're all still trying to understand, this would just be Darth Vader trying to establish the Empire. This entire story is truly barbaric as fuck. It's savage even, double entendre intended. And as much as I loved this entire series, and I still do, the finale felt like it was missing something big. It finished the story that they were telling, but I wanted something that said, this is the finale. This was worth the buildup and the time invested, because holy shit, Toranaga was an anamorph the entire time. John's ship being sunk was the most shocking thing, and it was set up and solved in this episode. We knew that Toranaga was willing to kill Hiromatsu to get what he wanted a few episodes ago, and Mariko's death happened last episode. The finale was largely exposition telling us the show, and Toranaga's master plan was already over. But let's dive into the episode and really pick it apart. Not too harshly. Let's do what we normally do and see how everything unfolds, and maybe if a second season could explain the lack of explosion, and ultimately what's going on with this wrap-up. The episode begins with a deceptive glimpse into the future. On my first watch, I really thought they were showing us that John makes it back home, of old age and with grandchildren, as a testament to a life well lived, and the honored swords still on display to show how fondly he viewed this challenge he overcame. Of course, we know that this was actually the future that John himself was picturing, and this changes by the end of the episode as he comes to realize why Mariko gave her life. I don't know if this bothered anybody else, but this was clearly some, to me, this was like a cosmetic cap used to age him and give him a certain look. I have big issues. This took me out of it immediately. What is this? The line here is just so defined, you can almost see the shadow from beneath it. It immediately took me out of this, and I spent the entire rest of the time trying to figure out if his forehead actually looks like that or if I'm nitpicking costume design. Either way, I was out of the moment, and it means that it failed its job. He looked great overall. He was a destroyed old man at the end of his life, and Like, it was a good scene, but this does just seem like a lighter skin tone, and it was quite jarring compared to the stunning quality that we've seen up to this point. This, of course, brings us to the fabled moment that defines his future, the loss of Mariko. She lies there, beautiful as ever, life fleeting from her body like the end of a gut-wrenching poem. John prays with everything he can to save her traveling soul, and it's heartbreaking knowing that he worries later if his pleas with God were successful or not. The intro rolls for the last time, and we see Toranaga reflecting on his life choices before a parade of fleeing hostages leave Osaka. It's quite amazing to see how many wanted to leave after Mariko died. Her speaking up and losing her life in return enabled countless to be spoken for when they felt that they could not speak for themselves. And that is quite poetic. This takes us to the Council of Regents discussing the assassination. Right away, you can tell that something is different. Lord Ishido stands with his back to the others, face darkened while they discuss what they all know to be his actions. Toranaga's brother does this neat little thing and delivers Lord Ishido a letter. Toranaga has fled Edo and plans for war in response to his prized vassal being killed. Lord Ishido pushes that their united front is the most important thing here, and Kiyama speaks on behalf of himself and Ono when he replies with disdain for this dishonorable act. Lord Ishido says that it is Toranaga, and that was something that we discussed being possible last review. It was a big old theory, and that is kind of the point. It truly could have been him. His goal was to trade lives for victory, and even if he didn't send the killers, he did send her to die. Amongst other things, this enabled him to get out of Edo and not be seen as doing something dishonorable for fleeing his surrender. I did kind of hope that it would be revealed that he sent those killers and the ones from before that enabled him to flee Osaka, but those are just simply theories of the past now and great fun while they lasted. The point, though, is that him saying it was Toranaga was believable enough to at least not be challenged in open court. They could not accuse Lord Ishido of this action, so they politely remained silent and continued betraying their kingdom to be proper. Lord Ishido wants to march forward on his location right away, saying that all of this was Toranaga's plan to make the council implode, and he is absolutely correct. If Lady Ochiba wasn't there to tell him that Mariko would be honored generously first, Toranaga may still have lost. He sees the truth in this moment, and the people tasked with checking him agree to his wishes. If they mobilized right now and marched on Osaka with the heir's banner, that is the end of Toranaga. But Ochiba was ultimately the one that needed to be manipulated, so they did. This entire series, I was just trying to figure out her game. If she was somebody more than the person she pretended to be, and at the end of it, she was really just Mariko doing what she thought was best to keep her people alive. She loved her son and played a fool to get what benefited her, much like any other man in a position of power throughout this series. It really did seem like she could have been evil at one point, but by the standards of Toranaga being the good guy, or the one that we rooted for, I mean, she's Princess Leia. It's only a matter of time before Toranaga and Ochiba are making little babies. They discuss the importance of the heir's banners and how their presence dictates which side is lawful and which isn't. Before he signs the final note declaring war, an earthquake shakes the earth, stopping his signature mid-stroke. It is a dark omen, and he ignores it while at least Kiyama takes it seriously. This brings us to our golden boy, Yabushige. I laughed so hard when he just said ear. We knew right away that he was suffering from something, but when that something becomes a little more clear, it is just a little bit less funny. I believe that he was suffering from a concussion, him chasing after things that weren't there, and the way he's talking just felt like they were hinting at that. And of course, to those unaware that that is a thing, it does seem like he's truly losing his mind. They talk about Mariko and how she was meant to be captured and not killed, that she resisted and died, and this was just out of his hands, giving us confirmation that this was his doing, which I really don't understand why. He was trying to capture her, like for what reason? Was his goal always to play this angle that Toranaga sent the assassins? Was Ochiba behind this like everything else, or did she not know? Is that why possibly, they were just trying to kidnap her because Ochiba wanted to keep her safe? I really wish we got like a little bit more clarity about the intent of the plan by the end of it, but right now, I'm just assuming that it was to frame Toranaga. Yabushige talks about war being avoided between the Taiko and Toranaga after a similar earthquake, and honestly, this is just the stuff of legends. Lord Ishido If he was going with the flow, which we'll get into a little bit later, he should have put that pen down and agreed that the earth moving whenever someone tries to wage war against this man is enough. Like, just stop it. After Yabushige goes fishing for a fish that doesn't exist, we come to Toranaga releasing his falcon with a note about the legacy that could be, hoping for plenty of offspring that could one day aid his children like the Lady of Steel helped him. It's honestly beautiful. I love this. We then see John waking up in Osaka and a series of flashes between this possible future and Mariko. He wakes up a few days after the explosion. Mariko has already been buried and everything feels like he is about to be marched to his death. He learns that Kiyama's men are waiting outside, and then he learns that he is allowed to leave. Father Martin comes to explain that he will be returning with Yabushige and the current state of pretty much everything. Hostages, war, Mariko, and Toranaga. John here highlights for us the simplest understanding of what has happened. No war, no needless bloodshed. Toranaga traded the life of a single vassal to get exactly what he needed. John reveals that he prayed to God for help, and Father Martin assures him that he absolved her beforehand. The two men share a kind moment because of their mutual friend, and John can see the woods. It looks exactly like it did when he was ambushed, and he addresses that. It is then revealed that Mariko was the only reason he was able to be spared, and that is quite the statement. We later learn that she negotiated on behalf of Toranaga, trading the ship for his life, and this shows us that the fathers decided to help Toranaga over Kiyama and Ono, and I really feel like that's not really being talked about in this finale. They could have shown more of the drama about this, as we know the captain and the other father mocked him for having such a positive relationship with Mariko. They developed some of this interpersonal drama and conflict, and perhaps the other two were not so willing to free John and risk their relationship with the other two regions that was, benefiting them money and ultimately what was already established. And Father Martin truly had to go behind their backs to make this happen. As we go through this episode, I'm going to highlight the points in which, if a second season does ever come out, these are points that could be explored further, and this right here is one of them. Father John and Martin then part ways, and he learns that Mariko saved him. This crying scene, it honestly felt a little bit odd. Something about the way he holds his head back and holds back tears. On my first watch, it was quite uncomfortable. I think I laughed even. It didn't look good. On the second watch, on a bigger screen, I didn't notice it as much, but certainly as I'm combing through the episode, it was a point that really stuck out as odd. We see Yachiyo playing with this tree branch before going to talk to his mother, and we got another scene just like this last episode, and both times I was really hoping that they would have shown us the tree and the stint that the Taiko's wife used to highlight Toranaga's influence on this boy's life. I feel like they could have shown us the tree doing well with that support to highlight that Toranaga is truly doing something to honor his former lord. Perhaps the reason that we don't see that is also worth mentioning. We then see Yachiyo and Ochiba discussing Mariko's poem. She refers to Mariko as a friend and then crafts the next line for the poem with her son's help. She uses Mariko's words from last episode about the flowers dying, adding a note about the wind that will take her petals away from here. It is a hopeful note about what's to come, highlighting the influence that will spread because of the flower that was Mariko. We then see John and Yabushige on the boat back to Ajiro. Yabushige absolutely losing his mind. They then see the sunken ship, and it's quite a blow to John. He has fought hard for this vessel, and its going merry spirit sleeps at the bottom of the ocean. Yabushige is then apprehended by his nephew Omi. It is an action that it doesn't feel like he wants to do, but must on behalf of Toranaga. He acknowledges that his uncle did something wrong here, but he is having some rather mixed emotions about ultimately being the one responsible to carry this out. They take his swords and they march him to Toranaga, while John learns that the Catholics burned his boat down. And then we see the humble fishing village being tortured, starting a drastic shift in the tone that Toranaga is presented in. This episode does a great job of showing him as the brutal warlord that he was. The heads on spikes is just such a great way to show the damage that he continues to do to this place to further his own goals, and then later learning that all of this was for appearances and to test John. God, chills. Stone cold. Yoshi Toranaga, my God. The meeting with Toranaga also carries this third heart venom, his true identity leaking out as the plan is completed, and even looking at his face shows an almost indifferent demeanor towards Yabushige. There is no emotion, there's no pity, just a discussion about fact. It is magical to see this true self appearing throughout this episode. Omi reveals that he was the one that told Toranaga about the grief Yabushige expressed the night of the raid. It certainly must have helped him win Toranaga's trust, and it seems like going forward he is just going to be a dutiful vassal. He is then asked directly about the night of the raid, and Yabushige admits it. Without further thought, he politely asks Yabushige to commit seppuku by sunset tomorrow, and oh my God, my jaw dropped. This just felt, it was so brutal. Then, in true Yabushige fashion, he makes it stranger. He cries out for a more painful death. That book that he was working on before wasn't Honorable Death's First Edition LLC. It was literally just a macabre fascination. He wanted to be eaten by angry fish for no other reason than he thought it would be a better death than traditional seppuku. This man was truly such a marvel to behold, and God, I'm so glad that this character exists. We then see John asked to be his second and is denied. I think this is because it would have been a terrible death like that he was after. He may actually have asked for this on purpose. Much like the young Toranaga trying to second his first enemy, John doesn't know how to wield a sword. He was going to do it for Mariko, but it probably wouldn't have had great results. Truly, it could have been anything. Instead, Lord Toranaga agrees to second him. He is then carried away and asks that Fudo Mayo, forgive me if I say that wrong, smiles on him tomorrow. This is a deity of the Buddhist faith said to keep away evil spirits, the unmovable wise king. John and Toranaga trade glances for a brief moment before he goes home and reflects in his garden. Now, John and Toranaga, they have beef here. John left. It needs to be addressed, but we know that the reason that ultimately he's not being addressed here is because he's being tested. The village is suffering, and Toranaga is just waiting for John to come forward with that truth. He knows who attacked his ship, and he's waiting to see if he's going to save the village or not. And oh my God, I love it. Fuji quietly joins him, and they share a kind moment, feeling more like friends than two people forced to live together. They both miss Mariko dearly, and the weather shows just how the light of the world has left them. In fact, throughout this entire series, the weather has reflected the mood as if the people and Japan are connected in supernatural ways. The happy moments away from pain, the worst moments life has to offer, and everything in between. The earth itself shaking Lord Ishido's pen, and the former Taiko's war stopped because of the earth speaking out. It really seems like they are taking such special care to show this inherent link of the people and the planet in this culture. As Toranaga says later, it's not about bending the will of the world to his command. It's about reading the wind. It's likely another reason he butchers this village. A few episodes ago, John hung this dead bird, and they feared the spirits that could manifest from it. Now, Toranaga's actions make the story true. This dead bird, whenever this story is ever told to anybody else or recalled in fables or anything like that, this dead bird is now a bad omen that preceded the village being butchered to find the person who created the bad omen. It's masterful because this is an example of how Toranaga reads the wind instead of forcing his will. We come to Toranaga and his new son. He is grateful that they protected him, not that they were safe. It is a very subtle and intended difference. Lady Kiri, who I believe is Nagakato's mother, brings up their dead son and how they still feel about it, and he's like, oh, thank God I have more. Otherwise that would be sad. You're right. I really just want to highlight how sharp his words are this entire episode compared to, I feel like, every other moment in this season. He is then handed a letter in secret from Ochiba. She laughs at the suggestion that she could have read it, and that moment, it felt so good. I love this. This was ultimately the point where he won. This letter details that Lord Ochiba will withhold her son's banners and the armies when Lord Ishido rides, and then announces that she doesn't want to be with him anymore. It's honestly so curious that she did all that she did this season and really controlled the entire situation from behind the scenes. She believed that Toranaga was responsible for killing her father alongside Mariko's dad, but I guess Mariko's death made her realize that it's about going with the flow. I was really expecting more about the relationship between Toranaga and Ochiba in this episode and why she thought he was to blame for her father's death. Like, she literally accuses him of this to Lord Ishido, but then refuses to say it publicly. So I was hoping for some kind of payoff about the reasons why. Like I said before, it is all about the game of it, and her story is really about a woman just doing what the men were doing in order to get what she wanted. But I wanted more about their relationship and why it seemed like she was focused on honoring her heritage until it really became a point to forget about. I'm not exactly sure why, but something about this feels unfinished. I feel like this could have been left intentionally bare so that if a second season is ever created with new material that continues past the point of the novel, this ultimately could be explored, alongside with the uprising against the Taiko, the invasion of Christianity, Toranaga's relationship with the faiths, and maybe more that we'll dive into a little bit later. But ultimately, this is it. This is the literal moment that he wins the Game of Thrones, and it isn't revealed until his discussion later with Yabushige. He remembers Mariko's words in this moment, highlighting that her words and actions were ultimately what won him this moment. It's beautiful to see him get this emotional thinking about her. Like, it does seem like he did truly care. This brings us to Fuji and John talking about burying her family in the family temple, but how she wishes to be close to them. Her desire to be close to them is mentioned here, but it doesn't come up again later, and I wish it did. This shift from wanting to bury them in the family temple to convincing her to dump them in the ocean so that they could stay together forever really felt like it was out of left field for me. If later he highlighted that them being a part of the ocean means that she could go to any shore and be close to her family again, I love that. I think maybe that's the better way to approach this, but it really gets cut down to them being together, and this line about her wanting to be close to them at all gets forgotten about because they start talking about her being a nun. It's a really sweet moment, and it seems like it's what she wants. It kind of sent me for a loop when John said no and tried to command her in a way that he never has before. It seemed like he was lonely. He was worried about losing all of the good people around him. Thankfully, Fuji has completed her service to John and Toranaga and says it is impossible. When John said, "Fuji, best nun," my goodness, so much love in this moment. It felt amazing. They then talk about the village suffering, and he prepares a message for Toranaga. He realizes that he can put an end to the suffering and is ready to do so immediately. As soon as he realizes it, he is ready to save people. And I think that's ultimately why he's a good dude. The morning comes, and he finds a peaceful moment in his garden, not drawing a line in the sand like he did before, but trying to find how the lines flow so well. And it's because of a rake, John. It's a rake. This goes until they meet Omi, who then asks for his weapons. He gives them up easily, and it surprises Omi. I also love this moment. It was subtle. It was like just showing his growth overall, though. Like, he is quite literally going with the flow. He is escorted to Toranaga, and we see the fisherman that was the first person to bear witness on the English boat that met their shores. They start talking immediately, and he drops the ruse, telling John his real name and his status, standing taller than he ever has before. He tells us that he was ordered to convert to this religion, something that I'm really glad we heard because we theory crafted about this. It seemed like Toranaga would probably do this. Of course, the religion takes, and he now honors God alongside his Lord, but it does further build some of the story in the background that I theory crafted about before and was thinking that we would see. This backstory and the spy assignment in general and the spies overall could be a great point to explore if a season 2 ever happens. They then talk about the search for the people who destroyed John's ship and how sorry John is for losing faith in his Lord. They discuss John's war and how he has come to realize that it was much less important than he once thought. He brings up how he believes Mariko traded his life for his ship and how the death happening in Najiro is just wrong. He cares about the people more than himself, and that's why he does what he does. He pulls out his blade and says that he is the disloyal one. He was the monster that came to use him. This brings us back to the first video that I made about the series and the concept of suicide being shown to John since the very beginning for a particular reason. It seemed like this could be leading to him giving his life for a meaningful purpose, and it kind of does. John intends to take his life here for the greater good, and Toranaga quite literally puts his hands on him to make it stop. And it's an action that shocks John and myself as well. This is where John learns this lesson about being a small part in a grander story, and it was very well done. Him screaming enemy to highlight the first word he ever learned here, and then seeing the future he has just being unraveled. He intended to die with Mariko's prayer beads on his blade. The Christian knowing that his religion marks this as a mortal sin, and John is going to do it anyway because he believes that people are suffering unjustly. He is more loyal to Toranaga and the people than he is to his God. And that's what wins him. Like, Toranaga, of course, knows the truth because he did it and waits to see where John's heart is until it's just about to be pierced. It is magical. Absolutely magical here. And then Toranaga leans down and tells him to get back to work. Truly his Hatamoto and a vassal that will serve him for the rest of his life. A fated relationship that Toranaga saw possible, tested, and made real. This brings us to Yabushige and Omi discussing their relationship. It seems like there's some real love that existed here, even if they couldn't say it. He says that he was a son to him and gives him the death poem. It is metal as fuck and basically just saying, feed me to animals. Omi thanks him for his teachings, and his Kosho accepts his final will and wishes him a great death. Yabushige and Toranaga then meet on a cliffside and have a wonderful conversation. Yabushige is responsible for Omi being such a good vassal because he kind of led by example about what not to do here. John as well, who also would have died if it weren't for him going behind Toranaga's back and then blaming the attack on thieves. They sit beside each other, and Yabushige wants to know what his master plan was. Lived long enough to see this and much, much more. It's revealed that the ship was his doing and that Mariko made it happen, and everything was a test for John. Yabushige brings up the wind being shaped by his will, and I think I have already covered this, but it's really not about forcing things to happen because you want them to. It's about reading the room, listening more than you speak, and going with the natural flow of things and moving only a little bit beyond that, instead of ultimately cutting lines where you want them to be. It's not about being a contrarian. It is about admitting Taylor Swift has some bangers. He reveals that Crimson Sky was already finished, and it was Mariko. She did what an army could never do. She promised them a future where in 1 month their armies would meet, and then Lord Ishido would learn that he had been betrayed, and then all of the other regents will betray him before risk going to war with the side that supports the Taiko's heir. Just as he promised the dying Taiko, he has taken care of his son. He was given a system in which he could stand against his enemies instead of being a single target for the rest of the world to swear against him. It's honestly brilliant, and I really feel like the Taiko and Toranaga really knew each other, and that's why the Taiko made this plan the way he did. Edo will be the start of his new center of power and usher in a great moment of peace. He reflects on the moment and how he got there, citing everybody playing a part in this plan, even the barbarian who only lived because he made Toranaga smile. It's then revealed that Toranaga winning means that anything is possible, even becoming a shogun. It is something that he is outright denied, but he comes from the bloodline, and his final note about not wanting to tell a dead man the future tells me that he is absolutely heading for that supreme title. All of this was his master plan, deep in his third heart, started long ago when he learned to live as a child prisoner hostage to his enemies. It's probably why a big focus of his was freeing the hostages as well, because he intimately knew the leverage that it creates. He is a ruthless man that tried to teach his son the lessons that he learned the hard way, but the truth is, I don't think that was ever possible. He did what needed to be done, despite the cost, and those that died felt comfort knowing their tiny part will be remembered in the story that made it possible. This was a perfect end to this character, and then of course we get the scene with John and Fuji. They row out. Again, this felt just a little bit weird at first, since she already had burial plans of her culture, but she goes along with it. It's more about closure than wanting to do something, for them to be close again. And then John leaves Mariko in the past as well. She lived, she died, and controlled nothing beyond that, not even him. Again, beautiful, even if I think it could have been a little bit tighter with the writing and ultimately how this played out here. On my first watch, I really could not grasp why he was set to like on convincing her that this was a better burial than a family temple. Like it feels like that's a part of her culture and ultimately should be the thing that's honored here. But maybe it's kind of showing us that John is now also able to influence the people around him instead of just being the Westerner that is being influenced by this culture, which is also, kind of interesting. We then come to them pulling the sunken ship from the sea and Buntaro joining to show the start of what I hope is a beautiful bromance. Toranaga watches his loyal vassals with hope in his eyes, mirroring the morning sun that promises a new day. The world perfectly in sync for those that can see how it operates, and his shoulder pads briefly becoming one with the mountains before surpassing the mighty land itself. This was a beautiful series, y'all. Goodness gracious. Every single part of my body wants a second season, and the reasons that I listed before is ultimately how it could happen. Also, right now, they could show us the war and what happens after that point. Season 2 with Lord Ishido just being unrelenting and pushing for blood as he refuses defeat to the man that he knows manipulated everybody. The hidden base in Macau could also come back up. The black ship finally taken care of as it represents the agreement that has been disproportionately benefiting the Portuguese instead of Japan. They have plenty that could manifest a second season, but from the start, this is ultimately where most people think this is over, and I think as well. I think it's probably likely that it's done, but the author or the people behind it did say that possibly with this little article that I just read here, I just found this, there's a little bit of hope here. Someone just has to make it happen. Now that we're at the end of this review, the beauty truly shines so bright. Toranaga is the man, but I want to highlight my initial feelings as well. As Nerdwriter taught me a few years ago, there are multiple ways to appreciate and comprehend art, and your knee-jerk reaction is certainly one of them. On first watch, I sat on Discord and streamed it with my childhood friends who I managed to all get hooked on this show. It was emotional, it was slow, and more exposition than anything else. I must speak for more than just myself here when I say I wanted this battle. I did not want to skip over it. I wanted to see these arrows flying over Japan. I wanted to see Lord Ishido eat shit for going against our boy. I wanted to see Yachio as a man, as a teenager sitting on the back of a horse next to an older Toranaga learning the ropes still. Or I wanted to see him smothered out completely. I wanted more action because these last 3 episodes were meant to be the build-up for it, and I wanted that grand moment that visually blew me away after emotionally and everything else. I was satisfied to that point. I just wanted a grandiose thing. On my second watch, it did make more sense. Like, they did subvert our expectations a little bit, and there's purposes for doing that, but ultimately, that can backfire as well. Now that I have dove into each scene and discussed my thoughts across 6,000 words like I finished writing a good chapter of a book, it is still quite amazing. The level of detail, the romance of all of this, the idea that we can find comfort in knowing that we're not the main character and simply a chapter of a much greater story. This was an overarching theme throughout the season, and the finale highlights that perfectly while also showing us that more happens after we stop being a part of the story. And damn, that's good. The natural flow will continue with or without us, and the finale showed the end of the story we were a part of. John admits his intentions. Yabushige's death shows us why unwavering loyalty is important, and Toranaga reveals his third heart. It's pretty amazing, but I really feel like it could have been better if they showed us a grand battle to balance it out. Like, it is beautiful. It is so beautiful. This is a series that I will love forever, but man, I wanted that battle. Overall, it was a good finale to one of the grandest shows that I've seen in years, and the impact should not be understated. Ending something like this is no easy task, and Yabushige being a big focus of this finale was perfect, as he was the fool that represented the audience coming to understand the great plan that was already finished. But with that, we come to the end of the video. Special thank you to everybody over on Patreon, as well as everybody in general, everybody that takes time for me in their day. I hope the rest of your time is spent feeling loved and satisfied that we all just watched a hit new series that wasn't overhyped, that wasn't completely trash, that during a political year did not have a big political message or anything in between. It was just a story that we all enjoyed, about a man with no moral compass, killing his friends when it benefited him, suffering delusions of grandeur, and his lukewarm water friend that just had a really good Much love, everybody. Please be sure to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives just like this, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.